Criminal Psychology Capstone with Aubrey Immelman as its professor. As a general overview, the unfortunate victim was Roger Vaillancourt, who died at the age of 17. It's from pretty close to St. John's, being in Foley, Minnesota, and having him die in October 1957. So it's been around for a little bit, and it still is not solved. And it is believed that a lot of the crime had happened at a dance hall in a cornfield, which is near Longsighting, Minnesota, and it was an alleged hit and run, at least according to official documents. But family and friends have always suspected the actual case of death to be a murder. So, Roger Vaillancourt was born in 1940 to his parents Vern and Carol Vaillancourt, and was a student at the Foley Public School. He himself was not necessarily the most active student, didn't really do much with sports or other activities, but he did have a good amount of acquaintances and friends. Sadly, he did have struggles at home. Vern was abusive and had alcohol issues. It was not an easy life for Roger. This, with a lot of other factors coming in, made Roger feel hard to connect with peers and made him very awkward and shy in some situations. However, he did hold down a regular job and was active in his church, so he did not live a hermit lifestyle. And Roger's body was found at night, October 6, 1957, in the path of traffic on Highway 169. He was originally alive when they found him, but he died shortly afterwards, as he was, I guess, terribly damaged, beyond any hopes of saving his life. So, a big part of trying to solve a crime is the risk assessment for the victim. And this doesn't necessarily mean it's under the victim's control. There's many things that'll increase your risk of violence, like your profession, your family, where you live, all play big factors. But for Roger, it was his abusive father was a constant danger and risk of violence. And his attempts to start making new friends and hang out with a new crowd called the Foley Youth, which had access to alcohol and even drugs, and were kind of known as more so like the ragtag troublemakers of the area. His personality also could have made him more inclined to find himself in these risks for violence. Being a more passive person, he'd be more likely to let things happen and then try to take an active position in preventing some things, which is always a danger. And then he was always shy around girls, and from this there was a speculation that he may have been homosexual. In the situational exposure, the time of the incident at night is always going to increase the violence chances. Hanging around with a rough crowd, aka the Foley Youth, would also be a large increase in his situational exposure, and then include the fact that there was alcohol and drugs involved. That would also increase his risk. Um, Anyways, the analysis of the offense is made up of multiple factors. The profile of the scene was originally documented by Mille Lacs County, 1 mile north and outside of the city limits of Long Siding, near the location of the Kitten Club, which would be considered a secondary crime scene. The cornfield is where the actual crime scene is said to have been taken place, and this would constitute it being the primary crime scene. Was originally believed to have been hit by 1 and possibly 2 vehicles while on the road, while he was placed on the road. And so that is also considered to be part of the crime scene. The vehicle in question that would have been used to transfer Vaillancourt from the cornfield to the disposal site, Highway 69, is relatively unknown on whose it would be. If the theory is that the Foley youth did it, it's probably one of theirs. Again, however, this has never really been intensely investigated. So there's about 8 or so people they believe to have known the true fate of Roger Vaillancourt. So using affidavits, given that it wasn't a solved case or a case where there was defined suspects, there is about 8 examples. The primary suspects would be Mac, who was the primary total actor in the case, and he was a very violent fellow and known as the leader of the group. And Dewey, who was also known to be one of the more popular members, is probably the main accomplice of the crime. And the remaining 6 people, Pete, Ann, Cindy, Terry, Darlene, and Shirley, were probably not huge members, but were at least witnesses or just people of interest for the case itself. So, focusing on Mac, because the majority of the evidence points towards the person that Mac's affidavit did for. So we're going to focus on him first. Again, he was the so-called leader of the Foley youth. He was described in a book about the case called Lifting Roger's Cross, which was done by a local pastor. He was described as no ordinary bully. He always had a weapon on him, and he had a consistent threat to anybody who angered him, and it's like, if you do not do what I say, I will cut off your nuts. It was also known to be violently mean, especially to homosexuals, which Roger was rumored to be. Yeah, and he was violently anti-gay in a fanatical and religious way, which is important to point out, because once we get into the details of the crime, it will need to be in a more fanatical, or at least like sexual, like sadist kind of way. So it's not like any ordinary bully would be able to do this. He was also said to have a very destructive temper and devious mind, which is the perfect recipe for creating a criminal and killer. And as an overall, the environment around the group of teens that made up the Foley youth was said to be like a wild and fearless and daring group. People who were always willing to push the boundaries. They had an obsession with sex. Like that was incredibly unusual, as described in the book, which likely pushed the intensity of the crime even farther. So we're going to try to recount the events of the night that led to Roger's death. First, he tried to be with this new group of friends, the Fully Youth. He had gotten a ride to the Kitten Club and had the intention to get drunk and have some fun with friends. And the idea is that Roger got drunk, but probably more so than he intended. And chances are this was a purposeful act of others trying to get him more and more drunk. Mac, again, the leader of the group, it was said to be the organizer of the night's festivities for Roger's initiation. At around midnight, Roger was said to have been escorted to the car, and this is where he attempted to get away and then ran toward a cornfield, or that's what is one of the theories. But eventually at some point, allegedly, Roger found himself in a cornfield, naked and surrounded by a group of individuals that he thought were his friends. And after the crime had occurred, they then dressed Roger back up and threw him in Dewey's car, and Mac would have told everybody to follow and to say the same story, which is probably something that they all stuck to for the rest of their lives. And this probably maintained this way because given Mac's violent personality and the acts that he just committed, the threat of him threatening to kill them if this was ever told or got out probably held a lot of weight amongst them. So eventually they took in Dewey's car, they drove Roger's almost dead body at this point and dropped it off on the highway, where it is rumored that Dewey then drove over Roger's body to try to cover up some evidence of other foul play. Looking into the crime scene characteristics to kind of help us get a better idea of some of they kind of give base to some of these theories that are around. The primary amount of injuries Roger sustained in this attack were brutal force injuries. All of Roger's injuries could potentially be classified as sexual acts, with the exception of some of the car damage that he would have by getting ran over by a car in an attempt to cover up some of his other wounds. They found pieces of corn in his ears and nose and other orifices, stab wounds. So there was enough evidence to claim that it was more than just somebody getting hit by a car. But the official reports state that the cause of death was accidental and that Vaillancourt's injuries and death occurred from being dragged by the vehicles that hit him, and it was assumed that he had been stumbled onto the highway and died from being struck by the vehicle because he was drunk. So all of these injuries were inflicted before Roger had died. So using the behavioral motivational typology, Mac, who would have been the primary offender, participated in the torture and murder of Roger Vaillancourt. It is said that he would be anger retaliatory, anger excitation, and sadistic-like behaviors. using this, Mac could be classified as a psychopath. He showed many of the psychopathic characteristics: lack of empathy, manipulative demeanor, grandiose sense of self-worth, impulsivity, lack of remorse or guilt, poor behavior controls, and a shallow affect. And his acts would be considered to be sexual sadistic. It appeared that Mac had gotten great sexual satisfaction from the deeds that he committed to Roger on the night of his death, which is unique and hard to be duplicated by somebody who doesn't have a sexual sadistic mindset. And some additional motivational factors could have been, the alcohol and drugs could have been inhibited more logical and less violent behaviors and emotions. The belief, and the rumor that Mac himself was possibly homosexual, which in a way could also point him in the way of trying to murder Roger, given that, especially at the time, being homosexual was seen as a very, very negative thing, being in the 1950s. And he could have just been projecting his own anger and humiliation of his own feelings and sexuality onto Roger. It is also said that Roger would stand up for the girls in the group and even possibly challenge Mac's authority over the group, which would have then further increased his rage with Roger. And with Roger probably becoming good friends with Dewey to try to get better with girls and to find a place to belong. It was chances that with that he was willing to take additional risks to try to blend in, and that would have made him even more vulnerable. And Pete, another friend of Roger's, who is rumored to be bisexual, had been associated with the Foley Youth as a tool to be used in Roger's initiation, after it had been speculated that Roger and Pete may have been interested in each other. But again, due to the times and views of the 1950s, homosexuality was pretty hard stigmatized. So when trying to analyze if the crime itself was organized versus unorganized, I would make the argument that it was in fact an organized crime, given the fact that there was no evidence to be found or processed easily which can be contributed to an effective cover-up. And it is said that the group had carried buckets of water to the field to get rid of any blood, and that they went to someone's house to clean off the blood off themselves and their clothes. So they came prepared for said event. And the vehicle itself was also cleaned. And given the fact that they probably made a pact either out of fear for their own safety from Mac or just in general, means that it was likely something that could have been planned beforehand. But Roger's death is largely a single case. There wasn't many other things that occurred around it. And there was no other crimes of similar intensity to Roger's death in the area. But there are claims that the main suspect, Mac, had threatened to kill people who had seen something or could have interpreted it as suspicious activity if they ever repeat what they saw. In terms of evidence found to link the actual suspect in any other victim's case, there is none, and that is why no charges have been filed and why the case remains unsolved today, which could be for a variety of reasons. So, it is believed that there was a decent cover-up. It is pretty easy to say that it was not investigated correctly and reported correctly, given the very obvious evidence reported with stab wounds and like corn cobs and orifices. He definitely got more than just hit by a car. But the main suspect of covering up the crime was probably Roger's father, Vern. And according to anecdotes from Roger's mother, Carol, Vern was very secretive in the hours and a few days following Roger's death. And Vern himself was ashamed that his son was sexually assaulted, in the sense that it was seen as a negative thing on the family that one of their sons was quote unquote too weak to defend himself and so forth. And Vern was good friends with several of the officers who worked on Roger's case, and Vern attempted and made sure that they would cover up evidence that could point towards shameful things to be put on the family, such as possibly Roger's homosexuality and other factors. And also, Vern behaved differently on the night of the incident. He was more calm than usual and had not been drinking as he normally would have been on a Saturday night, which has the potential to be coincidental. And also a lot of false reporting. The case was reopened back in 2005 at the request of Roger's families. Stories are unable to be combined and gaps still remained. They did not get a high-quality post-mortem evaluation of Roger's body. However, given other reports seen beforehand, that's where the evidence that comes about, where it's pretty easy to say that he did not just get ran over by a car, come into play. So, the conclusion with this all is that with Mac making threats to cover up the crime or anybody quote-unquote snitching on it, and mixed in with Vern trying to cover up any evidence of his son's homosexuality and to prevent shame on the family's name, it prevented justice from occurring at any stage. There's no definite evidence because of all the meddling that went on. So it is believed that quite possibly once Mac is deceased and other witnesses are entering the final portions of their life, that they might be more willing to share details to get it off their chest as they grow closer to dying. So there is the potential for this to be solved, but not much of a potential for justice to occur, which is a shame. And Father Kunkel, who wrote the book, where he himself tried to do as much self-investigating himself and created the story of how Roger had died, and with the sexual sadistic acts that he attributed some of the wounds to. That interpretation, if it is true,